Hello, my name is Yakub from the Barony March Debatable Lands in the Kingdom of Ethelmark, and I thought I'd do a video on arrow making, just a simple video. Now one caveat here is there's lots of different ways to make arrows. As long as they hit the target, you're doing it the right way. I just want to show you that it's not that difficult to make your own arrows, and just to show how it's done. First thing I want to show is the supplies you'll need to have before you start making your arrows. So, starting from the front, we have our tips right here. You want to make sure that all of your supplies match each other. So there's different sizes of shafts, right? There's 5/16, there's 11/32, so forth and so on. I'm making 11/32 using wood. You can use other materials also. This is what I work in. So I have an 11/32 shaft. I have tips here. These are assorted tips, actually. This is a 5/16. Then we have two for 11/32. We need feathers. You can either buy feathers and cut them yourself, which is what we're going to do today. You can buy them pre-made, actually. They come in a bag like this. These are not pre-made. I cut these, but I put them in a bag. You have to have a way to taper your shaft. So there's a couple different tools for this. We have one of these that are easily available. You have to buy the size that you need, however. Or you can buy a kit like this, which has different sizes. You can change them out. All right. I find these are a little bit more sturdy. I tried to cut an ash shaft once with these, and it broke, whereas this one seemed to work fairly well. We do need some nocks. So if you're going to shoot in open, you can use plastic. If you're going to shoot period, wood nocks. You can also do self nocks, which I don't do myself, but there's excellent videos out there on how to make self nocks. You're gonna need some adhesive also, just to hold the tips on and the nocks on, and to hold the fletching on. For the fletching, I use fletch tape, nice and easy. I'll show you how to use that. For adhesive for the tips and the nocks, I've tried all these different adhesives. And what works best for me is JB Weld, so a 2-part epoxy. I've tried Gorilla Glues, E6000, Goop, Super Glues, Fletch Tight, and all the tips and nocks seem to fall off, whereas I've only lost one ever with JB Weld, and I'll show you how I do that. All right. And then you also need some sort of string or something, which I used to bind the front of my fletching so that it doesn't catch on anything, and it just gives a little bit more structure when it goes into a target. So let's begin. Let me clean up my space. Sorry, my area is a little bit messy. I'll get some things out of the way here so that we can start. All right, first things first, we're gonna get the shaft ready. So my shafts are typically 29.5 inches long. So we can measure that. And then I typically just use a hacksaw. And we just start cutting. The wood's very soft. Fort Oxford cedar. There we go. Done. All right, then we have to taper both ends. So the tip end has a longer taper and the knock end has a shorter taper. And you'll see that on the tools. They have a long end and a short end. So on this one, we'll just do it like this. And I said this piece here is the sizing piece. So this is sized for 11/32. Goes on here. And then you just turn it. Just keep turning it until it doesn't get any more, just like a pencil sharpener. Then you make the knock side. Flip it around. Flip it around. Okay. And now we're done with that tool. Clean my workspace a little bit. All right, now some people will glue on their nocks and glue on their tips at this point. I don't, only because I'm very picky about how my nocks are lined up with my fletching, so I like to wait till after I have the fletching on, and then I glue them on. So let me get a magic marker here. Use a pencil. So I'm just going to mark on my knock and then put a line just so I know where they're lined up. This comes from the fletching for later. So this is why I know how it's lined up for when I put it all together. I can change that later or when I put the glue on. All right, so I'm going to take off the tip for now. I'm going to cut some feathers. So now we are fletching. So I'm cutting them from feathers, of course. All right, feathers have a direction, right? So it goes this way. You don't want it to go, you don't want it to fly this way because then it won't fly as well. So you want to make sure you have your fletching oriented correctly, your feathers oriented correctly. So then your pattern's probably going to have, I cut this out of just a piece of file, a file marker. And I have little arrows pointing towards the front, okay? So I'm just going to cut 3 out of here. So what I do is hold my template there, the rolling cutter, and I just cut, and then cut along my template, and then I have one, and then I go for the second one. See, cutting your own feathers is not difficult. And of course, whatever shape fletching you want, you can make. If you want to make a bat wing, you can make a bat wing. I'm starting to sound like Bob Ross. All right. One more fletch. For making a 3 fletch arrow. I typically make 4 fletch, but for these videos, I'm gonna make 3 fletch. All right. I now have 3 arrows cut out. Okay. Now we are going to put those fletching on. All right, so for this, make sure we can see over here. Can we see over here? We're gonna have to show. Gotta change our camera angle. Sorry about that. All right, so now we're gonna put the fletching on. Like I said, I have this little index on here where my knock and my shaft are, just so that it doesn't get messed up because I didn't glue it down. You can glue it down beforehand if you want to. This is a fletching jig right here. This is a Bitzenberger. They last forever. These are, I don't know, 50 years old. You can also buy plastic ones if you want to. They also work well. Get them on Amazon. If anyone's interested in any Bitzenbergers, we have some for sale. All right, so this goes in right here. All right, the fletching. So you sort of get to know where your fletching is going to be. I'll show you how this works. Basically, you put the fletching in like this. And I know that for mine to be right where I want it to be on the arrow, I have to put it right by this little scratch mark. I put that scratch mark there. The way these work is you put your fletching in here, put your arrow in here. This goes on the magnet. There's a magnet on here, and this metal sticks. And then your control is, it goes all the way to the bottom. And then you move it towards the arrow, and it gets seated right there. All right, so I have my arrow on there, or my fletching on there. Now I use fletch tape. Can you hand me this gold? Okay. All right, so how does fletching tape work? It's double-sided. You put it on right like that. And then you go along just like that. Okay. And then you cut it off. Okay. And I run my nail along it just so it's nice and seated on your fletching. Okay, this is the most annoying part, taking off the little film that keeps the double-sided piece from sticking. All right, so now we have a live fletch. We have it on there. It's all set. Like I said, magnet attached. Move it forward. Push it right on there. And you open up the clamp, pull it off. And what you're left with is a fletch stuck there. Now what I do is I run my finger down along the ridge just to make sure it's all seated there correctly. Looks pretty good. All right. What do you do next? You turn it. Turn the little wheel on the bottom and you'll hear a click. Or feel a click. Click. So that's the place for the next one. All right. So you just take your next arrow. Make sure it's in the right direction. Put it back on here. So I shoot with ring shoot, so my fletching have to be a little bit further forward on the arrow. You can put them further back if you want to, but for ring shooting, it's nice to have a little extra space for your thumb. So the fletch goes in. Now each fletching jig is, well, the clamp is not the jig necessarily, but the clamp is specific for a type of feather usually, either the right wing or the left wing feathers. Birds typically have two sides. If you find a third side to a bird, then, let me know. You can put the comments down below. But normally birds have left and right wing. So these clamps are left or right. This happens to be a right wing clamp, which just means it bends with the way that the feather bends. You can also get a straight clamp, in which case then you can use either left wing or right wing. Okay, so I smooth it out. Take off the little membrane here. Clamp it down. Push all the way to the bottom so it's in your control. And then just push it right into the shaft. open the clamp, pull it off. Then I take it off and run my thumb down along the side just to seat it a little bit. Do a double check to make sure my lines are lined up, and then you turn it one more time. Click. There's the third click. And since we're only doing 3 arrows, or 3 fletching our arrow, I'll just put it right there. Okay. Another important thing for arrow making is music. Gotta have good music playing. I don't have music playing because I don't want to mess with the audio. Normally I would have Wingo Boingo playing. Okay. Seated. Membrane off. On the magnet, on the bottom, push forward. Okay, we are set. Excellent. All right, so we have an arrow with 3 fletching on it. All right, the next step that we're going to do is actually put the ties on here. All right, let's move back to our center position. All right, back to center stage. All right, so I have my arrow, my shaft with my 3 fletching on there. Now I'm going to put a little tie around the bottom here. That's just to make it holds up better. All right, so what I would first want to do is I actually trim a couple of these little down a little bit just to give them, because they're all a little bit uneven. Yeah, my fletching are cut perfectly. All right, so now let me show you. You can use thread for this. I happen to have serving thread, so that's what I use, but you don't have to use serving thread. All right, so this is the way I tie them. Make a loop. The loop goes up there, and then I'm going over that loop as I keep going. So you can see how that's, there's a loop there, and I keep going from the tip to the knock side as I roll it up. Okay, can I have this other tool there too, please? All right, so I have this little loop here. Sorry. So, it's delicate work here. I have this little loop here. And I have this leading piece of thread that goes through the loop, right? And then I have my original bottom of the loop. And see, when I pull on that, that loop gets small. And then it goes underneath all of that wrapping. And then you can actually just tug on both of them, and the whole thing tightens up. And now we've got a relatively tight wrap. See, just to give it a little extra protection on the leading edge. That way when it goes into a target, or when you're pulling it out of a target, it doesn't rip off the fletching. And what I'm going to do later is put a little bit of Fletch Tighter super glue on there to make this like a hard candy coating. All right, so we now have it bound, so now we just have to glue. We have our knock here. Let's get this out of here. All right, so now we glue. Like I said, I've tried many different types of glue, and I like JB Weld. This is my little JB Weld setup here. This one works well. It's garbage. And I've got a tip. This tip, see, fits on nice and easily, like that, nice and clean. If your tip is gunky, it's been sitting around for a long time, maybe oxidized a little bit like this, if you put it in vinegar, in a bottle like this, with vinegar for a day or two, all the rust will come off, and then you drain out the vinegar, and then you put in some oil, keep it from rusting, and you've got tips. All right, so we have a knock, we have a knock, we have a tip, we have some glue. All right, so JB Weld, it's basically equal parts 2-part epoxy. One part. Two parts. And then I use my tongue depressor to mix them up. Becomes gray. Interestingly, historically they used pitch to fasten their knocks and tips sometimes. So this actually doesn't look that bad historically. You'll see it looks a little sloppy, but okay. Do our tip first. So gray stuff goes on the tip. Tip goes on. And then what I use this as a little smoothing device. And what it does is it makes a little collar for it. See that? So it actually helps stick it a little bit better, I think. Now we put our knock on. You can use the extra that's on there. And that's actually probably enough. Let's see. Like I said, I'm picky about my alignment of my fletching to my knock, which is why I put this on last after my fletching's on. That's good. And then, once again, use my flat side smoothing device. There we go. Once again, makes a little collar for it, which helps keep it on there, which is great. All right, so now the arrow is almost done. Like I said, the only other thing that I do is I put a little bit, so you can use super glue for this. This is Fletch Tight, okay, because I have it. What I do is I just saturate this thread here. And that just makes it harder. Perfect. And now we just set it aside to dry, and we have a completed arrow. Tip to knock.